Tactical Marines have served the chapters of the Space Marines for 10,000 years at this point. They have a long and storied service in every single chapter known to the Codex and the Imperium at large. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Tactical Marines. I'm sure what many people was their first unit, and what many people think of first when they think of Space Marines, and Warhammer as a whole. This is going to be a long one. The Tactical Squad comes in at 140 points for 10 models flat. Their movement is standard Marine stats. They are 6 inches of movement, toughness 4 with a 3+ save, 2 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 2. Now, there is a laundry list of ranged weapons to cover. Let's get into it. So there's a plasma pistol that, of course, has standard, which is one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. Now, you can overcharge that to be hazardous, but also gain strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2. Then, of course, they all come standard with a bolt gun, which is simply 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Nothing special, but it is serviceable for dealing with infantry. And they all have their sidearms, the bolt pistols, which is one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. Their melee is fairly mediocre, so this is just a little bit extra to help them get there. Then we get into the slew of special weapons. The Flamer is Torrent, ignores cover, d6 attacks that hit on auto, 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. The Melted Gun has Melted 2, one attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range with strength 9, AP 4, and damage d6, a nice little anti-tank shot if it wounds. The Plasma Gun has standard and overcharged. It's rapid fire 1 with one attack that hits on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. Overcharge gives it hazardous, of course, and bumps it up to strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2. The Las Cannon is heavy, with one attack that hits on 4s at 48-inch range, with strength 12, AP 3, and damage d6+1. The Heavy Bolter is heavy, sustained hits 1, with 3 attacks that hit on 4s at 36-inch range, with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. The Missile Launcher has both crack and frag. The Crack Missile is heavy, it's one attack that hits on 4s at 48-inch range, with strength 9, AP 2, and damage d6. A fairly standard anti-tank round, and then Frag is Blast with d6 attacks that hit on 4s at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, fine anti-horde. There's a Storm Bolter, which is rapid fire 2, 24-inch range, 2 attacks hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Next up is the Plasma Cannon, which has 2 modes, of course. It is Blast and Heavy at base with 36-inch range, d3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. The Plasma Cannon can be overcharged to gain a strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2, though this is still fairly disappointing for such a big plasma gun. The Multi-Melta has Melta 2 and Heavy at 18-inch range with 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 9, AP 4, and damage d6, a very nice anti-tank shot if you can get it to wound. Then the Grav weapons. The Grav gun is anti-vehicle 2+ at 18-inch range with 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. Very good at killing Marines and very solid against light to medium vehicles. The Grav Cannon is anti-vehicle 2+ and heavy at 24-inch range, with 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 6, AP 1, and damage 3. Very good for, again, shooting light vehicles and Marines, and isn't too bad against Terminators given the damage 3. And the Grav Pistol is anti-vehicle 2+ at 12-inch range, with 1 attack that hits on 3s at strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. Just a nice little bit of extra anti-vehicle firepower, as well as still being good against Space Marines. So this is obviously a huge list of weapons. It's honestly taken me quite a few attempts to read through all of this properly, but even still, they are still very varied, and they all do have certain strengths and weaknesses, which we will get more to in later, though I do feel that a lot of these are somewhat redundant and rather uninteresting to take as options compared to some of the others. Surprisingly enough, we aren't actually done with the Space Marine stats. In terms of melee weapons, they all come standard with a close combat weapon, which is 2 attacks hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, damage 1, a good bit weedier given the lower attack count. The Chainsword does at least have 4 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1, which is fairly solid, I will say. The Power Fist only has 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2, a fine Marine weapon, though the attacks count is very weak. Power Weapon has 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1, which is probably my favorite weapon out of the few. The Thunder Hammer has devastating wounds with 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2. The Lightning Claws have twin linked with 4 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP2, and damage 1, which is actually probably slightly better than the Power Weapon, all things considered, just given the twin linked and the high amount of attacks. Their abilities as combat squad. During the battle formation step, you can choose to split this squad into 2 even squads, selecting which models go into which allows you to make 2 units out of 1, which can be useful to make some more focused units, though overall isn't my favorite special rule. In terms of loadout, every model is equipped with bolt pistol, bolter, and close combat weapon. 1 in 10 models can have their bolt gun replaced with one of the following: either a flamer, melt-a-gun, plasma gun, heavy bolter, las cannon, missile launcher, plasma cannon, multi-malta, grav gun, or grav cannon. And then 1 tactical marine can have his bolt gun replaced by one of the following: either a flamer, a grav gun, a melt-a-gun, or a plasma gun. Now, out of all these options, in my opinion, the best are the melta weapons and the grav weapons. You can pack quite a few grav weapons into this unit, which makes them surprisingly vicious against light vehicles. So a loadout, for example, would be 1 grav cannon, 1 grav gun, and we'll get onto the sergeant in a moment, as he can take a grav pistol as well. Though the melta weapons are also fine and have some synergy with a single leader, now that I think about it, but those also allow them to be pretty vicious against standard vehicles and light vehicles, though again it is very swingy, being a melta gun in general. In terms of the loadout for the sergeant, he's quite customizable. The sergeant can have their bolt gun and bolt pistol replaced with 1 twin lightning claws, or 2 different weapons from the following list: 1 Astartes chainsword, 1 bolt pistol, 1 bolt gun, 1 combi weapon, 1 grav pistol, 1 plasma pistol, 1 storm bolter, 1 power fist, 1 power weapon, or 1 thunder hammer. He can only be equipped with 2 ranged weapons if one of them is a pistol, and only 1 can be a pistol. So, in terms of the loadout for this guy, I would probably bring either the power sword, or power weapon rather, first and foremost, because that lets you bring a grav pistol, which I think is the best pistol out of the bunch. Though, if you wanted purely melee power, the lightning claws are probably the best in that regard. However, my standard loadout for this guy would be a grav pistol. As I mentioned, it's a nice little anti-vehicle sting in the tail, and then a power weapon, which gives him moderate melee, that is slightly better than a assault intercessor, not really better, but different than an assault intercessor's. And I would generally leave the bolter or things like combi weapons at home. Now we're moving on to a buff options section, which is much more in line with the rest of these battle line choices for the Marines. They can't take a captain, but the captain is definitely more slanted towards melee, and I don't really think his stratagem buff goes too far on these guys, since these guys are mainly cheap grunts. The lieutenant offers lethal hits, which can be useful given that they can have quite a few attacks if you bring them with, say, plasma guns and then a bunch of bolters and such, but even Sten, I would say that would be generally more preferable on something like a plasma gun. And things like the grav trio, which I already mentioned earlier, the 3 grav weapons, are quite effective against tanks already, so lethal hits won't help too much there. The chaplain's a pure melee character, there's no real reason to run him here. The ancient offers nothing as per usual, leave him alone. The apothecary likes to sort of restore slightly more expensive models like Hellblasters, and I don't think these guys are really pricey enough for that to be worth it, given that their main benefit is how cheap they are. The librarian even gives them an invulnerable, which does make them quite tough for the cost, though I do think he's probably a little too pricey to justify that inclusion. The tech marine in general doesn't really like leading things, so I don't think, even with all the guns, he's worth bringing. Pedro Cantor is pretty good at shooting, he has good melee, the +1 attacks buff is very good, and bonus points because Cantor in Tactical Marines is like the oldest imagery in 40k, so if you run this, you have my infinite respect, and if, everyone should think that, by the way. So, it's going to be another video of dunking on Kato, because Kato's not very good, and definitely prefers more melee might than just these guys, and that's what you get for being the second company captain, sorry. Tigurius is actually weirdly good with these guys in my opinion. Because he is so good at shooting Space Marines and their grav guns are so efficient at killing Space Marines, you'll have a unit that can really destroy them, and since you're only using 5 of them here, the total cost of that unit's only 145 points. That's not too bad, and the other 5 bolter guys can run off and do some grunt work and kill some Hormigons and things like that. Ventress likes being in cheap units, though he definitely has a slant towards melee, and I'd say is better in company heroes. Calgar definitely needs to be with a more mighty unit than Tactical Marines, he should not be leading battle line units. Adrax, in a similar vein, is huge melee might, and needs to be with something that needs melee wound rerolls. Vulcan actually likes being with cheap units, similar to Ventress, and these guys can bring a Melta and Flamer to be pretty thematic. That would be a little outside of, say, Infernus Marines, but still, that would be a fine unit for sitting on objectives and shooting vehicles. Kisara Khan much prefers melee, so leave him away from these guys. Blood Angel's captain, same thing as a normal captain, just a little cheaper, so same applies here. Sanguinary Priest is also just purely a melee character. He needs something with actual might to back him up to make his AP buff really good, i.e. Assault Intercessors. Moving on from here, we have a few more buff options that are mainly from the Dark Angels. Lazarus is pointless and he sucks. The only thing he can do is really give these guys Deathwing for a very cheap, but I would still do that with Ezekiel first. Asmodai only gives melee buffs, so generally not worth bringing for these guys, as their melee is quite weedy in general. Ezekiel definitely prefers melee, given his +1 melee attacks thing, which these guys definitely don't have a lot of, though he does bring the squad up to a more intercessor level, given the +1 attacks sort of balances it out, though he would still prefer to be something that's more dedicated to melee, than can just sort of do melee than this guy can. Asriel's a great character, though, and it's not too uncommon to pair him with basic troops, but usually Assault Intercessors are much better for that if you're not bringing him with something that's super high danger. These guys, even with their swoot of guns, do like the sustained hits, but I would still say is not particularly enticing for a big, important character like Azrael. Next up, we have the Detachments, and in Gladius, like most Marine units, they work fine. They do work just fine, and they like Devastator Doctrine quite a lot, and if you've got a free CP, grab weapons like the extra AP from Storm of Fire. In Anvil, they can carry a heavy weapon, but I'd say they're better off as moving units rather than just sitting still. Devastators are much better there for that regard. Ironstorm, if you just want 2 units of grunts. For cheap, these guys do it well enough if you like their special weapons. Assault is nice on them, and the extra strength is appreciated up close, though nothing much special aside from that, despite the fact they can carry 2 Melta-Guns. Stormlance, these guys really are only a ranged shooting unit, so advancing and losing that opportunity is not particularly good for their melee mediocrity. First Company sucks, and they don't have veteran keywords. Righteous Crusaders, they do like the Feel No Pain vow, though they don't get anything from anything else, really. The Liberator group, melee is still bad here, but very capable of dealing with light infantry. The Lost Brethren, they have no support. Intercessors are more useful as objective grunts in that detachment. In terms of the rest of the detachments, they don't really have much purpose in the Angelic Host, as they tend to be quite good on objectives, and their melee will do with light vehicles and infantry well enough. The Unforgiven Task Force does offer them some shooting buffs, which they like, but this is a very weak detachment in general. They can gain Inner Circle, and a couple of Melta weapons do like the +1 to wound, though I would say that's probably a bit over-investment for just that. Raven Wing is pretty similar to the Inner Circle in that these guys don't have the keywords, so they don't really get anything, and Black Knights in general are very good on the front line, so I don't think there's too much use in these guys. Regular Intercessors and Assault Intercessors are much, much better in this detachment. In terms of Champions of Russ, even though there are the 4 different sagas, none of them really benefit these guys. Their melee is quite bad as it is, and I would say in that detachment, Grey Hunters are a much better choice than just normal Tactical Marines. In terms of competitors, the first thing that comes to mind is all 3 varieties of Intercessors. They come in smaller units, and their special rules are a lot better. Overall, these are smarter units in general, though I will admit not quite as fun as the Tactical Marines. Normal Intercessors, of course, excel at shooting infantry and taking objectives. The Heavy Intercessors are a lot tougher on objectives, and Assault Intercessors just pack a lot of power in general. Though if wanting to run 2 grunt units outside of Scouts, these guys are in general the cheapest fully armored Space Marines you can get that aren't chapter specific. And their special and heavy weapons do bring an extra bit of firepower, which at the end of the day, the reason that you want to run them is because they're cool and they're fun and fluffy, and that is the most important thing about a 40k army. Crusader squads are pretty much the same thing, just smaller. They're pricier, though they are a much better unit in general, and same thing with Grey Hunters, who trade out their heavy for an extra special weapon, and they all get chainswords, giving them actually good melee for the cost, and they come in smaller units. Also a better unit than the generic Tactical Marines. In terms of their best uses, Tactical Marines suffer from a few issues, 2 main ones. Their melee is weak compared to the more modern Marines, and their special rule. Most Marines do innately come in squads of 5 to 10, but these guys are stuck at a max of 10, and you can't run them in 5s, and their special rule basically just lets you run them in 5s, which isn't that much of a special rule, and it also leaves the 5-man squads being a little bland. Though I'm not exactly one to decry something unless its name is Belial. So how I would run them is I would bring the grav cannon, grav gun, and grav pistol, split the unit in two, put all of the special weapons and the sergeant into one unit, and leave the bolter guys to go do grunt stuff, and then have these guys move into the midfield and just kind of hunt Space Marines and medium vehicles. The grav weapons aren't going to be taking down the Land Raider particularly easily, but they will damage just about any vehicle they shoot at, and for things like transports or medium walkers like Sentinels, they will do quite a bit of damage, and as I mentioned earlier, these grav guns also work just as well against normal Space Marines, and the grav cannon doesn't have the worst chance in the world to blow up a Terminator with its flat damage 3. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.